Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning, everyone. In a moment, Minister Miller will be detailing our immigration plan. Before he does, I want to say a few things. Canadians are justifiably proud of our immigration system. It has made our economy the envy of the world. It's how we've built strong, diverse communities. It's how we've demonstrated that differences can and must be a source of strength, not a source of weakness for communities and society. Immigration is vital to our future. And as a federal government, we have to make sure that that pride, that faith in immigration is not undermined. We've been through a hard time these past few years. COVID stopped everything. When we started to emerge from it, workers were in short supply, things we needed weren't going to market, and prices started going up. So we acted. We made sure that our businesses had workers. Our economy got moving again, and we actually experienced the fastest jobs recovery after the pandemic in the G7. Now, it is time to make the adjustments to stabilize the immigration system that we need and get it working right for Canadians for right now. Today, we're announcing that we will reduce the number of immigrants we bring in over the next 3 years, which will result in a pause in the population growth over the next 2 years. This builds on our previously announced measures to cap international student permits and reform the temporary foreign worker program, all of which we are implementing with a single aim: stabilize our population growth to give all levels of government time to catch up, time to make the necessary investments in health care, in housing, in social services, to accommodate more people in the future. Our immigration system has always been responsible, and it has always been flexible. And so we are acting today. Because in the tumultuous times as we emerged from the pandemic, between addressing labor needs and maintaining population growth, we didn't get the balance quite right. With the plan we're announcing today, along with previously announced measures, we're making our immigration system work better. We need others to step up and do their part too. Far too many corporations have chosen to abuse our temporary measures, exploiting foreign workers while refusing to hire Canadians for a fair wage. All while, under the watch of provinces, some colleges and universities are bringing in more international students than communities can accommodate, treating them as an expendable means to line their own pockets. That's unacceptable, and it needs to change. Businesses should no longer rely on cheap foreign labor. My message to them is that there is no better time to hire and invest in Canadian workers. Our international student cap is dealing with exploitative colleges and universities, but all institutions need to take it upon themselves to be more responsible. And every step of the way, we need provinces and territories to work closely with us, too. Immigration is essential for Canada's future, but it must be controlled and it must be sustainable. With today's annual immigration plan, that is precisely what we're doing. Thank you all for being here this morning. Merci. Je passe maintenant la parole au ministre Miller. Marc.
Merci, Monsieur le Premier Ministre. Bonjour tout le monde. Hi, everyone. Glad to be here with you in Ottawa on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. I want to develop a little on what the Prime Minister just said. Indeed, immigration is indispensable, has been indispensable to the creation and the identity of this country, indispensable to its future. As mentioned in our recent history, it was key to increasing our gross domestic product, net entrance into the workforce, particularly coming out of COVID. Even going into COVID, we had labor shortages, provinces clamoring for immigration measures to bring in more people, and we acted swiftly. Thanks to that, as the IMF has noted, we prevented a recession, and I think that's important to realize when we look at some of the measures today to stabilize the immigration system. I'll cut straight to the chase when it comes to permanent immigration targets. This plan is probably the first of its kind insofar as it integrates and responds to a lot of criticisms that we've received in the past, that this plan that we table as a statutory matter on November 1st only talks about permanent residency. This plan this year gives a better snapshot for people to look at total population growth and the growth of temporary residents, as well as the measures that we're putting into place to reduce those populations over the next few years. When it comes to Canada's permanent immigration targets and aligning them to our economic needs, I'm here to announce and confirm that the current plan reduces next year's projections from 500,000 permanent residents to 395,000, a net reduction of 105,000 permanent residents immediately in 2025. After that, in 2026, a progression down to 380 to stabilize the numbers at 365 in 2027. The lower permanent resident targets, as well as the temporary resident targets that I will speak to in some length in the next few minutes, will have and are expected to impact the housing supply gap by about 670,000 units by the end of 2027. That means that we will not have to build an additional 670,000 housing units by that time. This is significant. Again, some structural aspects to this plan as well is the need to focus on people that are already here. It means that according and consistent with our plan, over 40% of permanent residents will come from the temporary residents that are already in Canada. These people are a young labor pool, they're skilled, they're here, they've begun their process of integration, and it doesn't place the additional demands on the housing, healthcare, and social services that we see with someone that comes directly from another country. It makes sense. We have a large pool. There are ways to integrate that highly talented pool into the permanent residency population. Adjustments will be made to our economic immigration streams to prioritize that transition of workers already here and focus on the labor and be responsive to the labor market needs. But for that, we need provinces to move forward and come forward with their data and tell us their needs. The federal government has an understanding of what those needs are. It is a sophisticated one, but it isn't the only voice in this, and provinces have a responsibility to come to us and tell us what those needs are. As I mentioned a little earlier, for the first time, the Immigration Levels Plan includes targets for temporary residents, such as international students, temporary foreign workers, the postgraduate work permits that comprise that. In the temporary resident space, over 50% of that is occupied by international students and postgraduate work permits. So the measures that we instituted a little less than a year ago are ones that are important to highlight the success of. We have seen, thanks to those measures, a reduction of about 43% in the number of study permits, new study permits accorded, and that's working. Studies are showing quite consistently that that is contributing to the lowering of the rent, notably in Vancouver, Surrey, as well as Toronto, close to 8 to 10%. And this is something which is a clear proof point, and in fact encourages us to take the measures that we are taking today with respect to permanent residency. The caps that we put in place are not measures that we took lightly, nor are the measures taken today ones that we're taking lightly without reflection. We are an open country, but not everyone can come to this country. Permanent residency is something that we hold dear. It has a value, as does Canadian citizenship. We've been a very generous country and will continue to do so. The numbers that we announce today roughly take us to back to a very ambitious plan that was put forward in about 2020. It reflects the fact that we have and we will continue to listen to Canadians. That's something that's important because the people standing behind me today are people that have been speaking to their constituents, have been speaking to economists, have been speaking to universities and institutions, and listening to their own families. And they've said consistently that while we are still and continue to be an open country, that volume that we have put forward is something that is of concern. And indeed, the latest Environics poll says as much. There are limits to governing by poll, and this is something that took some reflection over the last year. When I spoke to economists, they said clearly that their range of permanent residency needed to be reduced, but there wasn't unanimity as to what it was. It was about 350 to 450,000 for next year. This is somewhere in the middle, and I think it respects a responsible plan to grow immigration, while the net effect is a pause on the population growth. It is something that shows that we're listening to Canadian, shows that we have a controlled immigration plan that we can be proud of. One final point that I think is really important for the number crunchers out there, and I know there are indeed a few, the temporary measures that we have taken, including the ones that Minister Boissonnault has announced, are expected to result in a reduction of Canada's temporary resident population of 445,000 in 2025, an additional 445,000 in 2026, and perhaps a modest increase of 17 in 2027. Those are the numbers that we are factoring in as we look at the impact on the need to build housing units, but also the ones we look at when we look at the overall mix and the plan to reduce the temporary resident population from 7 to 5%. One final note on regularization, and I know this was an important mandate of our government. It has become quite clear over the last year that there is no consensus on a mass regularization program, despite the fact that people in Canada continue to be Canadian, except for everything but in name. When looking at this regularization program, we looked at the impact that this could have on deploying it in a short period of time and making sure that it is a success that makes sense and is fair for everyone. It doesn't mean we've left these people behind. We are prepared to institute a smaller program in number to make sure that we are targeting important aspects of the economy, whether it's construction or healthcare, to regularize some folks that, again, should be Canadian by right and aren't today. Those are measures that will continue, but in a much smaller amount than perhaps the mandate letter that I carry suggested. And that is something that we will continue to work on and continue to work with Canadians and the implicated organizations. We have a lot of challenges in this area. The consensus is one that was hard fought. It's something that we have to continue fighting for, and we will continue fighting for it. But today, with this plan, we're proposing a managed migration plan that puts control in the federal government over the numbers of people coming to this country and will contribute to a positive future for all Canadians and one where we can serve both immigrants and Canadians better. Thank you. Je vous remercie infiniment.
We will now start with the question and answer period. The first question to Mackenzie Gray, Global News.
Hi, Mr. Trudeau. How can you say your party's united after numerous MPs told you to your face yesterday that you should quit?
Listen, the Liberal Party has always had robust discussions about the best ways to tackle the issues that are facing Canadians. We are united in our desire to prevent Pierre Poilievre from cutting the programs and services that Canadians are facing. We're going to continue to have great discussions about how I can best lead the Liberal Party forward with measures that will counter the growing misinformation and disinformation that Mr. Poilievre is putting forward around Canadians. We're focused on winning the next election, and we've got a great team around us to do it.
Next question.
I have given you a deadline. So are you planning on staying as Prime Minister past October 28th?
Yes.
Okay. In this situation, we've heard that you've been listening, you've been reflecting, you listened in the caucus to the dissent that people voiced yesterday. At what point do you shift from listening, if this continues and the dissent continues and people continue calling for you to go, shift from listening to doing something? You've kicked people out of caucus before. Is that something that you're willing to do if this continues?
Unlike the Conservative Party of Canada, we have robust conversations within our ranks about the best way to move forward. I have a hard time believing that all Conservative MPs are fully supportive of having had one of their members get an all-expenses-paid trip down to Florida for an extreme right-wing anti-abortion church. I have a hard time believing that all Conservative MPs are fine with a member of their front bench dining with neo-Nazis over the past years. I have a really hard time believing that all Conservative members are perfectly fine with their leader politicizing issues around national security, but refusing to get a security clearance to be able to actually deal with foreign interference. In the Liberal Party, we talk amongst ourselves. We share our perspectives. We're open about our united desire to make sure that Pierre Poilievre doesn't get the chance to cut the programs and services that Canadians are relying on in this time of affordability crises. So yeah, we're going to continue to have great conversations about what is the best way to take on Pierre Poilievre in the next election, but that'll happen with me as leader going into the next election. I think one of the things that has ensured that Canadians have and continue to have confidence in our immigration system is that we have a robust, responsible immigration system that is also flexible. There have been many times over the past years and decades that Canada has adjusted its approach on immigration. Just think about the pandemic, for example, where we stopped immigration. We closed our borders for a long stretch in order to keep Canadians safe, to respond to the crisis we were going through at that moment. What that meant was once the pandemic closures were done, we had significant labor shortages. We needed to get our economy rolling again. We listened to business, we listened to colleges and universities, and we boosted the number of people coming into this country. That was a response to the COVID slowdown and shutdowns. But now our economy is in a different place. We've seen massive population growth over the past years, particularly in the area of temporary workers and temporary residents. And we are now saying, okay, we need to let our communities, our infrastructures catch up to the population. And that's why we're pausing population growth by reducing immigration numbers for the next 2 years, so we can get back pragmatically to a place where Canada can once again grow the way we all know we're going to need to in the coming decades. But getting things back to a responsible level is something that a responsible government does. It's certainly something we did lots of times during COVID when we put forward a measure and realized, okay, a few weeks later, a few months later, we needed to adjust it or end it or shift it. This is still echoes of a pandemic that continues to have impacts on what we're doing.
Merci, Premier Ministre. Mr. Miller will stay back and take questions.
Thanks, guys.
Hi, Mr. Miller. Public opinion data suggests that Canadians are beginning to sour on immigration. There was a recent poll from Abacus that showed 50% of people think immigration is actually harming the country. Is today's announcement an admission that high immigration levels were a large contributor to the ongoing cost of living crisis?
Look, as I've said before, it is easy to blame immigrants for everything. It is also undeniable that the volume of migration has contributed to affordability, but there's some nuance there. To what degree, to what extent? You can't go around saying that all the ills of society are caused by immigration. It doesn't make sense, but we've heard certain provincial premiers say that. It's unfair, it's unresponsible, it's actually damaging to the economy, including the same consensus that we're talking about today. No denying as well that consensus is under challenge and threat in countries like Canada. And we're lucky to have parties that aren't outwardly hostile towards immigrants currently. I think it's very important to keep that consensus because you can say it's under threat, but if you're on the sidelines playing footsies with people with extreme views, I think that shows through. Or if you're using it and weaponizing it during an election cycle to your own benefit, and often you see that backfire, well, that continues to attack the consensus. I'm really glad that in the latest Environics poll that went into a little more detail than the Abacus poll did, that you see still positive views towards immigration, but questions about the volume and legitimate questions about the volume. And I think that's fair. The Prime Minister acknowledged that that volume is one that you can certainly question and the decisions that were made to increase that. But there are benefits that came with that. So this isn't black and white. It's about an important cohort of the population that come here with great hope and contribute to the Canadian dream. They will continue to do so. This is still an ambitious plan, but it's a reasonable one that puts more control back into the federal hands to make sure that we are properly steering that population in a way that immigrant population in a way that's reasonable and fair to all Canadians and the immigrant groups that are coming in. I mean, some of the attitudes we hear are from more recent groups of Canadians that align with Canadians that have been here a little longer. So it's not about one group against the other. It's a consensus that does get challenged, but I think we still have it, and we need to fight hard to preserve it. And sorry to speak so long, but I actually care about this. You see what happens when that consensus erodes. Countries that we have perhaps looked up to in the past. My family is part Swedish, and you see what's happening there. You see what's happening, for example, in Germany, and I think that is something, it's a lesson for us. And you see what's happening to the south of us, and that's a lesson for us to learn, and we have to constantly fight for it. My biggest reproach with chambers of commerce and with groups that have benefited very much from immigration, when I meet with them, they're all telling me, including provinces, that they want more control over immigration, is that you have to stop fighting for it, because we've all gotten lazy about the value of immigration to Canada, and I think it's something that we need to realize, let it absorb, and continue to fight for it. At the same time, I'm not going to call people names that have been questioning the volume. The reality is that volume is one that on this particular point of time has been very aggressive. It's contributed to keeping us out of a recession, but it's come with some challenges, and that's why I think today's plan is responsible fundamentally.
Just as a follow, is it fair to say that those questions that Canadians have been around for a while? Like, some experts have been saying that this system has been barreling out of control for several years now. What took so long to pull the trigger on this?
You know, look, I think you can certainly have some reflection on the timing of this. We did, and the Prime Minister was quite clear about that, face, let's hope, a once-in-a-lifetime event in the COVID pandemic with, I think, labor shortages coming out, going into it and coming out, and we adjusted. Did we take too long to adjust? I think there's some responsibility there to assume. It isn't unique. It isn't only, I would say, the federal government that has that responsibility. You just look at the jurisdiction that provinces failed to exercise when it comes to regulating international students and the institutions that they have clear. They will clamor from the treetops that they have exclusive jurisdiction over education, and the colleges that failed to be regulated. Auditors General time after time said that they needed to adjust. What we failed to do, what I would say that we did for too long is we trusted them. We trusted them for too long, and now I have to take some very difficult decisions that make me into, a federal education minister and, an armchair demograph and an economist, and that's not my role. I'm an immigration minister, and the deeper I go into those jurisdictions, the fewer tools I actually have, and the more questionable it becomes constitutionally. So this is about assuming responsibility, making sure that provinces step up, and there are plenty of measures in this plan that ensure provinces will step up, not only in making sure they do their jobs with international students, but also with asylum seekers. And we're ready to have that conversation, because if we fail to be coordinated, Canadians continue to question that, and that contributes to the erosion of the consensus.
Question.
I mean, it doesn't count as a question. What was their question? My brain doesn't work that way, like with the language.
The categories where you're cutting and your obligations.
Yeah. Look, Rafi, to Melanie's question is a really important one. This plan for the next year has an economic envelope that is about at 59%. The family reunification one is at 24%, and the rest is humanitarian. There have been cuts relatively proportional in all areas. What we certainly wanted to do is to make sure that we were respecting our humanitarian commitments. They are significant. Conscious of the fact that we have made a lot of commitments over the last few years, and they are ones that are not only, and I think they're the right ones to do, but they do cost a lot of money, because you're taking people from a trauma situation. It costs a tremendous amount of money to resettle someone. It's the right thing to do, but we've made really important commitments to Afghanistan, which we've exceeded. We're now at 53,000, whereas we had publicly targeted 40. We've welcomed Ukrainians in an unprecedented amount. We've welcomed Syrians in an unprecedented amount, and other programs, including the Gaza program. That does have an impact on our ability, and we can't deny that, but our ability to act in other areas. And those are the difficult compromises we need to make. My effort in making this plan was to make sure that it respected our public commitments and do it at a pace that lived up to the expectations of Canada. But again, these are difficult choices, but they're ones I don't think Canadians would forgive us for if there were radical cuts in that, because they've demanded us election upon election, and usually during an election, that we act. We've made those commitments, and it's important for us to respect them.
Thank you. Ceci conclut la conférence de presse. This concludes the press conference.
Thank you.